All right, the Whiteout podcast. We're back. Noah, how you doing today?
Feeling electric after a big Jets win yesterday. It's nice to talk hockey with you, Braden.
Yeah, and you know what? Our first episode with a guest, and I couldn't be more pleased to bring in the host of Jets at Noon and the Jim Toth Show on CJOB, Mr. Jim Toth. How you doing?
I'm well, Braden and Noah. Thanks for having me. Thanks for being the first guest. This will probably be your last podcast because of me being the guest, but we'll see how it goes. But thanks for having me on the Whiteout. I look forward to this.
It's been a crazy sort of couple days of hockey. We did our last one before the two games, and it's been absolutely electric. In those two games, just so far, what have you guys seen that looks like this team is elevated? So what is it about this team that in these last couple of games have just jumped to sort of a new level of hockey?
I'll defer to the man of almost 30 years in broadcasting first to let him answer that one.
That just means I'm probably out of touch, but thanks, Noah. It's your own podcast, and you're letting me go first. To be honest with you guys, it's a little bit more consistency in their game, but I think it's something that's not maybe quantified on the ice. They just have a better attitude to them. They have a little bit of a swagger to them, and it's a quiet confidence that they're on a different path this year without any doubt, but they're on a good path. And so last night's game, we were kind of debating amongst ourselves at the station just about which was better, this one or the St. Louis Blues 4-0 shutout. And I think the problem is they were both great games if the Jets can harness this. So look, the system is new. They're buying into it. There's a lot of rejuvenation in a lot of guys that had down years, led by Mark Scheifele. He has rounded out his game, and even his offensive game seems to have a little bit of, as John Shannon says on our station, a glint in his eye. Josh Morrissey's having a great year, but I want to point out to the players like Brendan Dillon, Nate Schmidt. There are some role players on this team that seem to be fitting right in with the new direction this team is going, and then the veterans are on board. It was a tumultuous offseason, and tumultuous is an understatement because there wasn't much done to this roster. There wasn't a ton of change. There wasn't a ton of different directions. So the last two games, I think, the biggest thing, Braden, for me was they said, the 5 of the 6 points on the road weren't sustainable hockey. And then they came home for 3 games in the last two. It's very sustainable. It's very successful. So as much as you've seen maybe little intricacies of their system being different and a different kind of buy-in, I just think they just have this sort of off ice sort of change is what I noticed the most. The last time we saw these guys, most of them weren't happy. The last month we saw them, they were talking about how they're not happy with each other. And now it's all about, one direction. They're going in one direction. They're all talking about the same direction and they're all going that way. So that's what I think the biggest change is over the past 2 games, and then just this season overall is they seem to be rejuvenated and refreshed with this direction and this team, and they like each other again.
Yeah, it. We've talked about this numerous times about how the culture just seems to be shifted. It's completely different. It's two different squads that you look at from the end of last year to the beginning of this year. It's like somebody lit a fire under them and they just sparked a blaze. This team has climbed to new levels that I don't think we've even seen in the years leading up to the bad season last year. They've reached some new level, and I think it's because of the bad season last year. And Noah, I mean, I'm going to send it to you. What are your thoughts on these two games? It's been unreal.
Well, you say we've never seen them reach this level before. I will argue that this is probably the best hockey I've seen them play since 2017, and I think they even were at a higher level that season. I think the Jets can maybe get back to that. And as Jim mentioned, they seem to have a swagger that they're carrying with themselves. They know they can get the job done, and they're playing like it. Connor Hellebuck, my favorite player on the Jets, the guy who I consider to be the Jets' best player, he's played lights out. I mean, the scoring has been there the last 2 games. They're outscoring their opponents 9-1 in those 120 minutes because they don't need overtime when you're outscoring your opponent that much. And even though they've had all that scoring, Connor Hellebuck has still been calm, steady in net. He's 21-1 right now to win the Vezina if you guys want to make a pretty good bet, in my opinion. And I just love everything I'm seeing from the Jets these last 2 games. There's a lot of energy there, a lot of swagger, for lack of a better term, and we'll see if they can keep it up.
Yeah, in the last two games before we talked, Connor Hellebuck really has not faced as as many shots as he's used to, right? It was 30, 22, I think it was in the Dallas game. So if we can keep giving him some leeway here, which we haven't given him even up until these last two games, he's gotten tons and tons of shots. If we can keep those shots down and maybe only have to make one ginormous save or two ginormous saves a game instead of the 4, 5, or 6 that he's used to, I think this team has a long way to go with that backup in Hellebuck. And we've talked about it numerous times of that Hellebuck is the best player on this team and that we live and die with him. And so far, that's been the case. And I know we've talked a lot about, different players. We actually got a sort of I've been seeing some strange stuff online lately, and I had to bring it up because it's sort of been living in the back of my head. Me and Jim talk about this once in a while. I'm a big advocate for Blake Wheeler. But I saw a very, very strange a TikTok, couple tweets saying that Blake Wheeler is the best player on the Winnipeg Jets. And I think this is absurd. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he is. I don't know. But Blake Wheeler is not the best player on this team. We talked about it last week. Mark Scheifele is back to it. I have to eat my own words, but Mark Scheifele is back to great Mark Scheifele. Kyle Connor has been playing well, not maybe as great as we wanted him to. And Hellebuck's been playing amazing. So is there any argument, Jim? Do you think that Blake Wheeler is even in this conversation of best Jet right now?
Yeah, you and I I've got to get off Twitter then because I'm still getting hounded about how Blake Wheeler needs to be bought out and things like that. Blake Wheeler, for a 36-year-old with the second last year of his contract, has been really good this year. He's taken the stripping of the captaincy very well. You and I have talked in the office that, I think whether he realized it or not, it had become a burden on him and it weighed on him. And coupled with the fact that he is so intense and he's so win at all costs and all he, sort of worries about compared to some younger players who, come into the league and we all know who they are. They come in, they want to have fun, they want to, but Blake has been more than good this year. He is winning puck battles along the boards. I think this is the first year in my time covering him in the 11 years in the city that he has slowed down a bit, but half a step slower from Blake Wheeler is still pretty quick in the National Hockey League. But his work ethic's been there. He seems to on the ice taken on this role of not just playmaker anymore, but a little bit of a grinder. He's digging pucks out of the wall. And I think this is Rick Bonus's system that he wanted. It's a two heavy forecheck system. And so I like the way these lines are constructed. Ehlers and Scheifele digging the puck for Connor. I love the fact that it's Wheeler and Dubois digging things out for Perfetti. It's sort of kind of how this system works. And if you look at Dallas, that's what they sort of did too when they made their pairings. They separated Ben and Seguin. But along those lines, like for a 36-year-old guy, if he's on pace to do what he does, and that's be 4 or 5 points off a point a game season. What hounds him is the analytics of the defensive game, but that has been good too. And I will argue with anybody as you look over his career, when that line was getting caved in, it wasn't from Blake Wheeler's effort. It wasn't from Blake Wheeler's turnovers, and it wasn't that. So I will argue, though, that he's the best Jet on this team. He is not the best player on this team, but he's very good, and you need a bunch of them. What you guys are saying about Connor Hellebuck, I'd never really thought of, because when I think of best players, I think of forwards and defensemen, but he has been different. But to me, to Noah's point of what Connor Hellebuck's doing this year, that gets back to my point of a swagger. I think this team was embarrassed last year. And some of the players in training camp, and Neil Pionk and Nate Schmidt sat down with us on Jets at Noon from training camp and said, yeah, we have a chip on our shoulder. Like, we're embarrassed. You can't forget that everyone was on board. And when I say everyone, the NHL was on board with the Jets being a really good team last year. These players talk. They're in the circles. They hear about what people are saying about them. I think this team, collectively with the fresh start, the new direction, the stripping of the captaincy and saying we're all in this together, has elevated them to, as they said, we were a bit embarrassed last year, and we're better than that. And that lies the argument. How much better? And I just thought they weren't anywhere near as bad as they played last year. And so I'm on this train of what Connor Hellebuck's doing. Like, if there's one guy on this team that's going to have an off season and carry it with him, it's Connor Hellebuck. he doesn't understand when they don't win. He doesn't understand when he doesn't play well. When he doesn't play well and gets yanked, he's been quoted as saying, I don't know why I was pulled. Like he just has this linear focus of going forward. And his play kind of is indicative. So I agree with you guys. He's the best Jet on this team, but there have been several good ones. Blake Wheeler is no longer the best player on this team, but he's still a really, really good one. He's in the top 6 for me, top 7. You got Hellebuck. Morrissey's playing great. We can go through the list of forwards, but he's definitely in there with his play. And the fact that he's adjusted to this, like he seems to have this weight lifted from him, and I just have to play now. And that's what he's doing. And I think it's a perfect line with Dubois and the size they have there and the skill of Perfetti. So I don't think what you've been reading is accurate. I don't think he's the best Jet on the player, but I mean, this is a team that's going to be driven by 7 or 8 guys, and he's one of those guys.
Yeah, I was shocked reading that, and I think anybody reading that probably there was lots of comments sort of debating back and forth, and I'm like, should this even be a question? And don't get me wrong, I'm a big Blake Wheeler advocate. Even through the taking away of the captaincy, I knew that it was probably going to, if not help him, at least help, or not just helping the team. It would help him as a player. It would take some of that. He didn't love talking to the media. He wasn't the biggest media guy. He wouldn't have to do that. There was pressure taken off of answering for the team. Um, I
Lost in him being the leader. Sorry to cut you off, right? But lost in him being the leader was because he cares so much. So I never thought of this either until the start of the season, and we go through the 2 weeks of him losing the captaincy. But if name me a guy on the team that would be asked to do something, including have a lesser role, and would do it, it's Blake Wheeler. This is a guy who moved to center for 6 weeks and hadn't played center since high school. This is a guy that'll kill penalties. So maybe Rick Bowness is smarter than us all, because like if you show me a player on this team and totally change their role and see how they could get through it if it's better for the team. At the front of the line is Blake Wheeler. Lost in his captaincy is everything. The relationships, the thing is driven by him wanting to do what's best for the team. And I think it sat in after a few days that this is what's best for the team, I think he really accepted it and thrives in this. So sorry to cut you off there, but yeah, like I myself forgot about what a team guy he is, and that all of even his misgivings of being short and rude and demanding more of the younger players and work ethic and all that is driven from this is what's best for the team. So as we discuss this, that's why I think he's accepted this so well, is because he understands that whether my pride is hurt or not, this is what's best for the team.
Yeah, and I think me and Noah have talked about this, where I personally think that the culture of the Winnipeg Jets is fully embodied by Blake Wheeler. I think he is the player that people look to when they're trying to see what this team is all about, and he showed it perfectly this offseason. Noah, do you want to talk about just sort of the after effects of Blake Wheeler losing the captaincy coming into where we are now and how it affected the team overall?
I do want to touch on the fact that someone is saying Blake Wheeler is the best Jet this season. You guys hit it on the head. He's not. He's been really good. His point production has been outstanding, I would say, for what I expected going into the year. The thing with any NHL players, you're going to be judged on your salary in comparison to how much you're producing. And I find with fans, sometimes they get jealous of a player who might be making more than he deserves. I don't know. Also wanted to give a special shout out to Pierre-Luc Dubois. I do think he's been the Jets' best overall player, but as Jim mentioned as well, Josh and Mark Scheifele, there's a bunch of players that can be mentioned. The impacts that him getting stripped have had on the team seem to be showing so far in the record. I mean, it not only has it woken him up, but it seems to have woken everyone up a little bit in regards to no one's safe. This guy's been our captain and our leader for many years, and look at what we can do to him. We can take the C off his chest. He doesn't even have an A right now. I think it's been for the best for this team, although I will say when it happened, it kind of blindsided me. I never expected Blake Wheeler to be on the Jets without the C. I thought maybe he wouldn't be a Jet at one point, but I never thought him being on the Jets without the C would be possible. But here we are. He's had a great start to the season. I wouldn't say he's number one best Jet player by far, or he's in the top 5 to 7 range, but I think it's been for the best for the Jets. I think it's been for the best.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, what the Jets did with Rick Bowness compared to somebody like the Canucks, right? Where it's so far different just of how much difference a coach can make with their decisions, even right immediately, right? You look at Rick Bowness and what he's done with this group that was down and out, tough on themselves, weren't sure where they were going, and then you look at Bruce Boudreau, who sort of seems to lost the culture in Vancouver that they had built. So you got to give Rick Bowness praise so far this year. Obviously, he's done some great things. But I did want to get into Noah had a couple questions. I had a couple questions just for you, Jim. Just since we have you on, we want to sort of get some insight into everything. So I'm going to start it off and just say the first question, I guess, is you've interviewed many players from the off season to sort of everything this past year, and further back. Who's the I don't know your favorite interview that you've done with a player so far, either on Jets at Noon or your own show?
Oh wow, that's that's interesting. This is now about me, which I'm not comfortable with. Um, you know what? There's been so many, and the ones, look, I like to have fun. So, as well as covering a team and getting facts and needing statements, the ones that can enjoy it and have conversations, it's twofold for me. It's the ones that have fun. So over the years, like the Chris Thorburns always were a good time because he always got, he was there for a good time, not a long time, even though it was a long time. And if you can joke and have a little humor with it and talk some pop culture and if they make fun of each other, so that's guys like that. But then there's the guys that I learn from. There's the guys that I'm a big believer in. You ask players, they're the ones doing it. And it doesn't matter what the topic is. I'm gonna have my opinion, but I'm gonna form my opinion on what the guys in the game doing things are doing, and also based on what I think and then what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing. Andrew Ladd was a great talker of the game. And I knew him from his junior days when he was a Calgary Hitman and I was doing WHL series for Shaw TV. And so, they come along. Guys remember you, guys recognize you. They might not have known you, but it's those conversations. I remember Nick Antropov was always really good. And I remember when Burmistrov was a healthy scratch once and everybody was in the room and they were leaving. And I just said, "Hey, Nick, you have a minute?" Because I knew they were close. Like they spoke the same language and English was a barrier. And I said, I maybe I was a little too brash, but I was like, "You were a healthy scratch in Toronto as a high draft pick. How did you talk to him? Do you go through it?" And he's like, "Oh no." And he gave me such great stuff. Like, "No, I don't talk to him." He goes, "If you're a healthy scratch, there's a reason, including when I was. And it's up to you to look inside." Now, I'm not ignoring him if he wants to talk to me, but you got to play better. You got to be well. And so for a guy who had sort of, and we know Nick Antropov was never good enough for anybody, like whether it was the Leafs, whether it was here, for him to have that understanding and wherewithal, I learned there, like here you are, healthy scratch, you got to hold your head down, and he's like, "No, you don't. What you got to do is you got to hold your head high and be proud and learn from that, and know that when you get back in, that you have some things to work on." So, I mean, I don't know. Everybody always asks me that. I can't pick a favorite. I mean, Dustin Bufflin was so fun to be around, but he hated doing interviews. Dustin Bufflin was great to talk to if the mic wasn't rolling. The minute the mic was rolling, it was what everybody saw and heard. Yes, no, I don't know. Um, but while you're interviewing other guys there, and Blake Wheeler, to be honest with you, over the years, and maybe it's just because he's been here so long, but Blake holds you accountable. Like if you don't know what you're talking about, or if you don't understand what you're sort of, and he doesn't understand what you're saying, he will call you out on that. And that's often kind of seen as arrogance or being rude. But most of the time, if you listen to it, it's him clarifying what you're asking. And if you don't know what you're asking, and I appreciate that. So just, I mean, we could go on and on. Tim Stapleton was always fun. So I'm sort of torn, like the guys I learned from and the guys I don't. But there are the coaches, there are the players that people will often, just maybe put on social media that I could talk hockey with this person forever. And people like that, like Guy Boucher was a guy. He's a psychologist, and he's got 3 degrees. And again, the stories he would get on how to motivate was great. I'll listen to John Cooper talk hockey for days. Daryl Sutter's kind of like Dustin Bufflin when the mic's not rolling. He'll talk hockey for days, and you learn so much from. And that's what being in and around the room I really liked, was just once I get so much information from this. And for any young journalist out there, the idea of not going to practices, that's what I miss the most, because you learn, you get stuff. That's why if I'm not even covering a game, I try and get to the press box. You're talking to scouts, you're just seeing people. It's those things about the little intricacies that, hey, this is a conversation. Oh, really? I didn't know that. We could talk about this. So in my experience, like for guys that I loved interviewing, there's not really one or two, but it's split for me. I remember the guys I used to have a blast with, I remember when the movie Goon came out. Andrew Ladd was hilarious one time when I said, after this long in the game, somebody got suspended for something. I said, after this long in the game, does anything surprise you? And he obviously didn't want to talk about this. And he looked right at me and said, yeah, that you still have a job. And of course, no one else in the scrum knew that. And I'm not saying I'm friends with Andrew. I never hung out with him or anything, but just over the years of junior to, pros, you're familiar. And he gets, hey, how you doing? What's going on? And hey, how are you, Andrew? Nice to see you again. And he's like, yeah, that you have a job. And then I fired back with something right away with like that could go both ways or something. And he goes, oh yeah, you lasted longer than I thought you would, and I'm lasting longer than you thought. I don't know, but just stuff like that. Like if you can have fun, it's such a long season, it's such a grind. We all take it so serious. Mark Stewart was also always great. And he was great to the point where he was friendly and courteous, but to the point. He was the one who had the great quote when the Evander Kane thing went down in Vancouver, who just said, you guys, even being here every day, will only get 5% of what actually goes on in this room. And, today you got about 20%. And that's all you're going to get. The room is fine, blah, blah, blah. And his point was, is we hear these things, there's these rumors, something actually went public like that, and we probably only know 20% of the story. So, I mean, just guys who are open, honest, talk hockey, love it. I'm listening to all the audio coming out of this Jets roster and last year. Like Josh Morris, he's a great guy to talk to. When I did Moose Hockey, was his rookie year, and we would talk about, he's such an intelligent guy. Like he's way smarter than I am. Half the time after a Moose practice, he'd be asking me, so WHL, is the ice going to stay there? Like I remember going to Cranbrook, that rink and stuff. And then we'd all be off on, the economy of oil and stuff. And I'm like, what? I don't understand what you're asking me about the economy and oil. And so, I mean, it could go on and on. I have too many stories, too many guys, but I just love having fun. And I think that there's not enough fun in the game. And then also I just love the guys who give you stuff like, just this is how it works, this is what we see, this is what I feel. When the whole hockey debate of fighting was going on, I just was getting so frustrated because I wanted to know, like, why is this still in the game, and why, even though I'm fine with it, like I think it has a role in the game, I think that's been proven, I think it's diminishing and will be weeded out on its own, but it'll never be extinct. And I always kind of thought to myself, with the whole debates of concussions and everything else, these guys are choosing to do it. Nobody's trying to stop an MMA fight. And so I would talk to these guys. Brian Little was a great guy to talk to. Brian Little was like, I don't fight, but I'll tell you something. With fighting in the game, I feel fully safe as a smaller play and going into the corner. I'd never have my head on a swivel because I know if something's going to happen, it's going to happen once and it'll be taken care of. This is from a guy who doesn't fight. And then I talked to the fighters like Chris Thorburn, and he was adamant. You don't think I don't know this? You don't think I know the percentages of concussions? And I know more about it than anybody listening to your show because this is what I do for a living and I'm fine with it. So just stuff like that is the insight that we all sit around on shows and podcasts. And I know this, I know that, but I try to base it all on. I still disagree with a lot of the players and a lot of the coaches on what they think and how things function. But I love those conversations. So I don't have a favorite all at all. I just named you, probably took up your whole podcast trying to find names. But people always ask me, like, who's your favorite interviewer? Who's the most famous? Well, Wayne Gretzky was probably the most famous, but I didn't, get much. It was a lot of cliches and stuff like this. So one of my favorite interviews, Braden, is when Mark Scheifele joined us on Jets at Noon this summer and just did a look. I was angry. I was ticked off. I was questioning my future because I was not happy after this long in the organization. But now time's settled. I want to be a Jet. I want to be here. And that's why I always say, like, we need to talk to these guys. Like we need to get them out in front and get their feelings. We don't have to do it a month after, but 2 months after, you're still feeling the same way. So that's what I love about the business, the conversations and learning yourself. I think every person can learn when they ask the right questions.
Yeah, I remember that Mark Scheifele interview that killed me because I remember we wanted to get him on, and then the golf tournament happened, and that's when it was just the strangest sort of place to get him, and it was awesome.
I think I opened the door and I said, I don't think he actually wants to be traded. After 3.5 months of going, I think he wants to be traded. So, but that the part of it wasn't the 180. It was his honesty about what he was going through at the time and how he was so angry and upset and thinking that way. But then understanding that always happens at the end of the year when on the final day. And once some time passed, it's not how he honestly feels. It's just in the moment. So that's why they're important. So.
All right.
But I named a few people. I hope that helps of guys that were good to talk to. And
yeah,
Brad Lauer, current assistant coach, is a great talker too. From the days when I covered the ice and he was a coach there. Scott O'Neill's a great hockey mind. Like I mean, I think we saw that while he was filling in for Rick Bowness. I am very, polite and eloquent, but direct to the point. There was a way I still go back to that Vegas game. He called out the top six and made it a point of how they got to get on the same page as the rest of the bottom six. But that being said, they're our best players and they will, and blah, 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 like called out, and so I think guys like that, you just learn from and understand how they handle things.
Well, we hit the 5 minute remaining on our Zoom because we can't afford Zoom Premium. So
yeah, I'll do one word answers here. I'm sorry, I knew I'd.
No, that's all good. We're gonna we'll just reset it quick, and then we're good to go, and then we'll just continue on.
Yeah. So one question I had for you here, Jim, was with the current state of the Jets, and I know this can change day to day in the National Hockey League. What is that one piece you think they are missing to become true Stanley Cup contenders? If you think they aren't already there.
Yeah, well, look, I think they're a playoff team. I thought last year, and the roster hasn't barely changed. Where they were a top 10 team. I don't think they're the Colorado Avalanche when fully healthy. I don't think they're the Tampa Bay Lightning when they're fully healthy. But I do think they're in that 6 to 7 to 8. I mean, pick your team range. They could always use a number one stud D-man, but so could every team. And what I'm talking about is the Victor Hedmans, the Cale Makars, even Alex Pietrangelo. I don't know how much gas he has left in the tank, but he's still very, very good. I think they could use a bona fide, and I think Josh Morris is the number one D guy. I think the rest are 2, 3, 4s. They probably have an abundance of 3, 4s, and they probably have an abundance of 2s. They don't have, and a lot of teams don't, that number one stud D man that can do things like Hedman and Makar, and I've named them, that going on and on. Roman Yossi's that can put up 70 points and also help keep 70 out. But I don't think you're going to find that. So I don't know if that'll put them over the top. I really like the reason I think they're better than last year. I like their depth. I think Sam Gagner is the best, most talented fourth liner they've signed in the 11 years. And we can go through the list of who they brought in for the Nate Thompsons, the Matt Hendricks. It's well, it is. It's they just not as skilled and as good as Sam Gagner. And I like Axel Jonsson-Fjällby and what he's brought to the team. I think he's a third liner. Morgan Barron's good, but you can always improve on those guys, right? Like if you could get a top 6 guy that, due to this lineup, is forced to play in the third line, I think that's something you add for sure. I don't know about David Rittich, if anything, and I don't want to panic or be blamed for any of this if something happens to Connor Hellebuck, but I'm not sure about him. But can you get a better, more bona fide experienced backup perhaps? But you can always use more of whatever you have, and if you can improve it. And I think that when they shopped, like you made the point, Noah, you're surprised without the captaincy, Blake Wheeler here, and I think a lot of people are. I think the writing was on the wall when they both agreed that maybe a change of scenery would be best. But back to the point of him dealing with the stripping of the captaincy so well, if there's a conversation of theirs, Blake, we looked at it. We couldn't get you to places that you wanted to go that would make us better. and that's what we're about. That's what we've always been about, and you know that. Then I think that eases why he's still here and playing well. But if you can improve that, if you can get more scoring, if you can get a bona fide number one D man, I think you could do that. I don't think you can in today's NHL in the cap. So how I would improve it is by just adding to, look at your third line. If you're happy with it and it's playing well, and let's say Ehlers is healthy and Appleton's on it, but if you could get that better, you would do it. If you can get the fourth line better, I think they will do it. If you can get, more solid D that provides more offense, especially in this system where the D are so active and so involved, they do it. So the one thing is that number one bona fide stud D man that every team is looking for, other than the maybe 7 teams that have one. I don't think that's attainable. So the things I would look at is dealing from their depth on D and improving whatever aspect you can, whether it's in the bottom 6, top 6. And who knows, guys, like maybe if you deal a high-end prospect like Heinola or Sandberg, and you put in a second round pick and maybe a solid fourth liner that's on the team now, because you have too many, Tornado or no, I'm not saying he's that, but the extra, he's the healthy, the Harkins or something, and you can get a second line player or a high end third line. I think if they feel they're close, they will do that. I think the biggest misnomer about Kevin Cheveldayoff is that he's too patient. He is patient, don't get me wrong. But when this team has been contending, there are moves being made. And going into last season, no team had done more. He traded Patrick Laine, brought in the second line center that they traded for at 2 previous deadlines in Pierre-Luc Dubois. He went and got 2, 3, 4 D-men in Schmidt and Dillon. And then he re-signed Paul Stastny, who is the player I'm describing, a top, a second line guy, but on a good team is a very good third liner, above average third liner, which is what he's doing in Carolina right now. So he did all that, in the span of 6 months. So if they're close and if there's a deal there that will make this team better, I think he does it. But that's what I think. The wish list is that top D-man. And then what I think they can actually do and could do is just augment in the depth of the team.
Yeah, you mentioned a top D-man there. You were naming franchise defensemen, not just top D-man.
I think the only one available was Pietrangelo in free agency. Those guys aren't available. So, and I don't know, maybe I'm saying that, but there's so many good offensive D-men now that I don't know if a team would be willing to move one. You would have to look at contracts. What's that next tier? Is it Rasmus Anderson, who's a 40-point D-man in Calgary and plays in all the roles? The Quinn Hugheses of the world are never going to be available. Thomas Chabot is a solid D-man. He's not having the offensive seasons that we expect from him after that. What do you have, 72 points one year? Are those guys available? I don't know, because they're their team's Josh Morrissey, right? They're their team's, not the stud big, as you call them, and perfectly know, the franchise D-man, but they're their number one guy. And so, are those guys available? I don't think so either. So it's a staring contest with so many teams.
And you mentioned the patience of Cheveldayoff there. While it might frustrate some fans, I think it's paying off right now. They were good enough. They didn't have to make any rash decisions, and it's showing. And maybe Cheveldayoff goes back to his Chicago roots and gets Jonathan Toews or Patrick Kane if he's looking to hit it out of the park. What would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my thoughts on it would be the price. Like if Landeskog comes back and they want to fill that Kadri role, do they look at Jonathan Toews, who's on an expiring contract? Joe Sakic, I think, has done an amazing job as a general manager, but he's also willing to pay prices for players, and he pays good prices for good players. I don't know if Chevy would circle around and give up that much on an expiring contract, where I think the other teams like the Avalanche, who have no problem getting free agents and stuff, they can do that. The problem with the Jets is that it always will be. It's Winnipeg. And so, getting guys to waive no trades is difficult. And look, that's the job, though. Like, I don't want to alleviate anything from Cheveldayoff or make excuses. It doesn't matter if it's Cheveldayoff in the chair or not. The toughest GM job is Winnipeg. You can't get free agents. You have to convince them. You can keep them when they're here, but you can't keep all of them. And then so you would have to do something with Toews is, would you be interested in another year or two at 2 to 3 million after this? Because to give up a couple picks and maybe a high-end prospect to get him at the deadline. So what's the price for that? But look, those are things. The one thing I think, and I know is always a misnomer too, is that Chevy's not doing anything. He has these conversations. Like, it's just, it's a lot of it ends right at the player. A lot of it ends with just no thanks. A lot of it ends with, hey man, Winnipeg called. No thanks. You know what I mean? Um, so I know those conversations happen, and they have happened with a guy who wasn't on the market in Paul Stanley, who waived a no trade to come here. So those that's what's lost in that move is that conversation was had in November and then again at the deadline. And if he's not having those conversations, that doesn't happen. So he has the conversations. It's just a tough chair to be in. But you're right. Look, is it patience what he did this summer if his team wasn't been made better? I think I do believe a lot of GMs would have made a trade just to make a trade. I got to shake this up. I got to make a move. I think it's patience, but also knowledge of your roster, knowledge of bringing a coach in and a staff that can make this work. I don't believe the idea of we're going to keep the roster together and get Barry Trotz. And when Barry Trotz didn't fall off, they got Rick Bowness, and that was the plan. I think they explored heavily moving key players like Wheeler and Scheifele. And then when the return wasn't there to make the team better, and it didn't make smart cap this wise, it wasn't done. So is that patience, or is that good as the coin I phrase GMing? I don't know, but the idea of it's also lost in what you just said, Noah, of the patience with this roster is the knowledge that Rick Bowness can do this. The knowledge of your own roster that the guy that's coming in was Trotz, if they could get him, who's a no-nonsense kind of coach. But the next guy is Rick Bowness. Nobody saw Rick Bowness coming. I don't know any of the insiders that saw this move coming, but it's a brilliant move, and here's why. He's 67 years old and was going to retire. Do you think Rick Bowness is coaching for his next contract? He is not. He's only got a 2-year contract when more coaches get 3 years. So Bruce Boudreau, he's in trouble. And do you think he's coaching and trying to keep this? He wants another job, I would think. Rick Bowness took this job as a challenge. He likes this roster, and he's also in the mind of give me 2 years because I probably plan on retiring at 70 and I'll be 69 when this contract's out. I'll run it the way I want to run it, and the way it needs to be run is what you're asking me to do, is what I think the conversation was. He's not coaching this roster for another contract. He's coaching it to get it to try and win a Stanley Cup, and that's what was needed. And so that's perfect GMing. I don't need a guy who's going to, be buddies with the players. I don't need a guy who's not going to, try to forge relationships and make this player better. I need a guy who's going to come in and go, this is the way it is. And if you're with me, it's going to be a lot of fun and it's going to be great. And if you're not, I don't care. And I think that's another great move by the GM.
Yeah, and me and you've actually had talks about this, and I joke about this with everybody, and everybody seems to have the same reaction on Tortorella. Not a lot of love for him. Personally, I think, depending on which team he goes, like this year with Philly, he's done obviously some good things. And I think a lot of it is dependent on what does the team need at the time. The Vancouver Canucks needed Tortorella because they didn't have that grit. They didn't have a player that was going to get in the mud for them, whereas Tortorella is a guy that'll do that and a guy that'll beat you into shape. And that's what he's done with Philly this year. And so I think Bowness was that perfect sort of mix of what the Jets needed. And a lot of teams don't look at that. Don't look at what type of coach they're getting instead of, oh, this guy's won a lot, this guy's done this. Well, look at what your team needs. And speaking on what you said about the Demon, is that, like we've talked about, there are your top tier A-list defense, and then there's that drop off. It's changed a lot over the past couple of years. Of there's not those middle tier defense anymore. It's your one guys, and then it's like your 3-4 guys, your 5-6 guys, and that's sort of the same thing with how the goalies have been this year. Is that you have those studs, those top 3, top 5, and then it drops off. Like everybody thought Demko this year, and a couple other guys were going to be, that 5th, that 6th. No, he's down at the bottom as well. You have your Vasilevsky, your Shesterkin, your Hellebuck, and Hellebuck's been unreal. We talked about this last podcast that we said Hellebuck's a top 3 goalie, and I think right now it's undisputed that he's number 1. He might be, maybe number 2, but
they have the least goals against right now. It's only 12 games into the season, but when did we ever expect to say that about a Jets team?
Yeah. Yeah, looking at the defensive core, you don't think that this team is going to be the shutdown, lockdown defensive team. But we've, with Hellebuck and with the way that the system is set up, we've played very, very good defense. And especially in these last two games, giving up 22 shots to Dallas is almost unheard of against a team that good, that scores that well, that defends that well, that plays their system so properly. And so it's been an unreal season. And I mean, we're sort of getting into the podcast of where, you know, we've done our speculations. Now we're trying to sort of pick apart the teams, see what works, what doesn't, and it's been a heck of a couple weeks here. We've got to see some fantastic hockey.
Yeah, and it's still early. Like that's the thing. It's 12 games. This team is 8-3-1. They started 9-3-3 last year, and then
Yeah.
sort of went off the rails. But back to your original question when we started today's episode, is what do you feel differently about the team? I think that, you know, whether we can quantify it or not, I think we all feel different about this team than we did when they were 9-3-3 last year. And COVID came into it, but there's different things going wrong. The biggest change from this year to last year is like they have given up 6 goals in the third period. And third periods, like once this team lost what they had, like whether say they had a great second period, and if they gave up 2 or 3 goals, it couldn't get it back. It just was off the rails. It became individual. The system wasn't being played anymore. That's what I take most of this team, even in loss in Dallas, even in loss in Vegas, their third periods have been their best periods. Like they can get it handed to them, like they did in those 2 games, and then they get back to their system, which I haven't seen that team do a lot of that last year. So it's still early. I've always said like 20 to 25 games is when you know what you kind of have or could be, and then it's still got to be depend on consistency and injuries. But so I did want to emphasize that it's still early, but yeah, 8-3-1, and the schedule they had, the teams they played, and the fact that they can get back into it when they do get hemmed in for 4 or 5 minutes, when they give up 2 goals in 4 minutes in a second period in Colorado, and then come out and shut Colorado down for a third period and go to overtime and win. When they get it handed to them in Vegas, and then they play better in the third just to get it to overtime. And then the other games, like, they gave up a third period goal to the New York Rangers, 1-1, and then they beat them 3-1. Like, those are things that I didn't see last year. And those are things that I think that tells me that you're never going to have a full 60-minute effort. But when it goes awry, those pockets of going awry are smaller than we've seen last year, which would often last 11, 12 minutes of a period. Those are now 4 to 5 minutes, and then they play better again. So that's what I just have my eye has seen that is better about this year's roster than last year.
Yeah, and we talked quite a bit last podcast about where do we want to see this team. Excuse me. Where do we want to see this team by the Christmas break? And so I'm going to ask you the same thing. Where do you want to see this team heading into that Christmas sort of area? We said top 3 is where we want to see to keep that culture sort of going around Winnipeg, the buzz going around Winnipeg. But if
in the center,
what's that?
top
Sorry?
3 in the
That's
top 3
right.
in the center, just to clarify.
That's right. Yeah. And if we did see them in a wild card position, that's great as well. But I think that sort of then pushes us back to last year of, okay, well, we were up and now we sort of we're tanking a little bit. So where do you think that we need to be to keep this sort of energy going towards the back half of the year?
Well, I'll start with my prediction for the year when everybody said they could be a wild card team. I think they're a top 3 team in this division on paper. But as Blake Wheeler said himself, we all know what on paper means, and we all witnessed last year what it means. Not very much. So I started the year. I go, look, I think with Rick Bowness and what he did in Dallas, this is a top 3 team. Is it the number 1 team in the division? Not in my mind. I think that's still Colorado. I had Dallas, the Jets, St. Louis, and Nashville all second to fourth, and whoever played better, whoever didn't have injuries. So now I'll stick with that. I think they're a top 3 team in this division. I think they're better than a wild card team. I think they're as good or as talented. I think they're more talented than St. Louis, more skill. I think they're more skilled than Nashville, but Nashville has better D. I think the goaltending in Nashville is on par with Connor Hellebuck, but Hellebuck is above it, but it's close. I don't like Jordan Binnington at all. Chicago, Arizona's Arizona. They're not going to be around. And Minnesota, just the cap is hitting them. Minnesota has some really good young players, and they have a really good top line, but they don't have the goaltending the Jets do, and they don't have the depth the Jets do. They're really young because of the cap issue. So I had Colorado winning the division. I had St. Louis, the Jets, Dallas, and Nashville. I think second is between Dallas and Winnipeg, and that's where I think they should be at the end of this year. The lost part about the start to this season, and again, it's so early, but most of it's done without Nick Ehlers. And now a lot of it's being done without Morgan Barron. And so people say this all the time. Every team's had injuries. It's not an excuse. Well, no, it is an excuse. If you lose two players in your top six, there's a reason why they're in their top six. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. If you have two players in your bottom six that can replace top six talent, then I'll agree with you that, but you don't. And so missing Nick Ehlers hurts, and this team is doing this. And when Mason Appleton, and he's opening some eyes with what his role doing up there. So I have them third or second. And from what I've seen from Dallas, I mean, Ottinger is the real deal. It's funny. I think if there's a U.S. Olympic team, it'll be Ottinger and Hellebuck. And John Gibson's still kicking around and stuff like that. But I have them top three in the division at the start of the year, and I've seen nothing that tells me they're not going to be top three in this division. They're better than a wild card team. Yeah. Now they have to be consistent and continue what we've seen and stay healthy and prove it. But again, for whatever on paper is worth, I think they're a top three team in the division.
Yeah, that's exactly where we were. That's pretty much nail on the head of what we said. Noah, do you have anything that you want to, any last couple questions that we want to get into before we hit the, I've changed the name. It's now the Bui question of the week. So made it sound a little better. You like that? Yeah. So we'll hit that. Jim's going to love it or hate it. He might hate it, but
I'm having a good time so far. So.
Oh, I love to hear that. And I'd love to hear what your favorite memory from 2.0 is so far. What are we, 10 or 11 years in here? Do you have any memory that sticks out? I know you're probably going to list off 10 for us, but if you could
take 3 hours. You know what? It's just, I have two, but so it will be a little lengthier, but the first one is just the drop of the puck. Because when they came back, I moved over to 680 CGOB, so I left television. And I was really excited to do it because of guys like Bob Irving and Kelly Moore, and those have been such good, fine, great gentlemen to me in the industry when I moved here, but just to work with them and learn from them. And so personally, it had always been a goal for me to cover the NHL. So when the puck dropped against Montreal in that first game, I'd always thought that I'd have to get out of this city to cover the National Hockey League. And I got to a point where I liked the city so much. And I was like every level of my career, I've been happy at. Like I've been happy covering the Alberta Junior Hockey League. I couldn't believe I got, although a very, very tiny paycheck, paid to cover hockey. Then the Western Hockey League, I love covering the Western Hockey League. And you always strive for more, but I was always comfortable at every level of going like, I like it. American Hockey League the same. Like if this is it, this is great. I'll do what I can. But when the puck dropped between the Jets and the Montreal Canadiens, the Immigrant Song was playing from the land of ice and snow and wah, and just chills up my back that, hey, because it was from May till then, just nonstop every day, 10 to 12 hour days getting ready for this season that was coming. And when the puck dropped is when it just hit me that I'm covering the National Hockey League. So that was a huge moment. It had nothing to do with the 2.0, although it was surrounded by it. It was just a personal moment. And on one side of me was Bob Irving. The other side was Kelly Moore. And I looked at both of them and they sort of teared up as the anthem was playing. And I thought to myself, this is amazing. These are two great broadcasters in our industry who had spent years covering the National Hockey League, decades. And it hit me for the first time. They never thought this would happen again. So it was just a cool moment for them, for me to be a part of it, and then also for myself realizing that. And then the second moment was the whiteout in the playoff run. There is nothing, whether you're a fan, a player, we'll start with the players and the coaches, or the media to cover playoffs. It's intense. It's a different level of hockey. There's so many storylines in it. But I think at the time I used to tweet out with every home game, the building is louder. And I think a lot of people took that as all, it was serious. That building got louder with every game and every round. And when Vegas came to town and Scheifele dropped to Bufflin and he hammered that one by Marc-Andre Fleury and the roof came off that place, it was, I'd never heard it. I've been to AC/DC 5 times and it has never been that loud. So those are the two moments for me. Again, just on a personal note, no accolades, nothing like that. I just love what I do. And to be involved in those two moments and the parameters around it was the best part of them being back or 2.0.
I will say when Bufflin scored that goal, I thought in that moment, I'm like, the Jets have a real chance at winning the Stanley Cup here. And then everything just went downhill that rest of the series.
I fell into that too, Noah, when they won game one because and I got vilified by Golden Knights fans for a year after that on social media when I would tweet about the games, as they would say, because I tweeted out the Golden Knights can't keep up with the Jets. Like they skated them out of the building. And so I tweeted out after game one, I'm like, they take game one, I think it was 3-1 or something. And I'm like, the Golden Knights can't keep up with the Jets. And I thought, they're going to the final. Like I now saw nothing of this. And then I still think the Jets in two of those next 5 games, 4 games, outplayed them. Just Marc Fleury was unbelievable. So, but I hear it and I appreciate that too. Like, oh yeah, they're too slow away. And I'm like, well, to your point, the last 3 games they kept up pretty good. But that first game they couldn't, remember? Like they Bufflin blew the doors off the barn and then they just got outskated. And I thought, they're in trouble. So, and it's interesting. Ryan McGill, I covered in Western Hockey League, who's now an assistant with New Jersey, but he was an assistant with the Vegas Golden Knights for years until this year. And I remember going down and talking to him after the series had ended, and I said, congratulations, blah, blah. And I'm like, the Stanley Cup Finals, who knew, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, what do you think the difference was? Like, he goes, to me, it was two things. Hellebuck's a sensational goalie, and that won't happen many times in his career, but he got outplayed by another goalie. And second is Dustin Bufflin ran out of gas. And he goes, that's just my opinion, but he goes, playing that much, playing that heavy minutes, playing that, he just, as the series wore on, he just couldn't find that extra level. And he said, and I think Hellebuck got outplayed, which he goes, I don't think will happen very often. That is a great young goaltender, but Marc-Andre Fleury was just lights out. And I agree
Yeah,
with that. That's probably the two things that changed the series.
one thing I do remember from that series as well is James Neal telling Patrick Laine he has to test Marc-Andre Fleury, and then Laine going out there and scoring. So,
James, the real deal, Neil, never short of confidence, that guy.
and quick trivia for you: do you remember? I'm guessing you obviously do. Who scored the first goal for the Jets 2.0?
I think it was Nick Antropov.
It was Antropov. A
It
guy we
was,
were
yeah. It was like 5-0 at the time. And that shows the passionate Jets fans. I remember the first goal was Mike Camilleri absolutely tattooed a slap shot past Pavlik. And I was just sitting there in the press box and I just said, that is an NHL shot. Like that shot is at a different level. And that's the NHL level of, having covered years of the American Hockey League, having seen many of the NHL stars come through the American Hockey League. Like that first goal is an NHL slap shot. And then the other thing I noticed is when it was 5-1 and Antropov got the first goal, the barn erupted as if it was the Stanley Cup winning goal, even though they were down 5-1.
amazing, amazing. And those are two names I haven't heard in a while. So, bring out the history books there.
Yeah.
Camilleri and Pavlik.
Yeah, Pavlik.
Yeah.
Holy.
Miss that
It's
guy.
it's
That's
hilarious that you brought up the whiteout being a great moment for you because it's funny I've never told this story, but the reason I picked the name of this podcast is I was in I can't remember exactly what grade it was varsity basketball. We won this prize to go to the first whiteout game, right? And we show up and just the feeling like it was almost where you couldn't sit down. It was that electric that we're in the 300 somewhere, like just a bunch of kids coming from basketball, and it just the whole building it erupts. Your ears hurt after, like you can't hear. That's how loud it was, and that's always just been stuck in my head. So as soon as I was thinking of the podcast, I'm like, it was just there because that moment was just unbelievable.
I don't
Yeah, and
know.
I'm not a Winnipegger, so like I heard about the whiteout, I watched the whiteout. I'm like every town has their thing, no big deal, and it was all encompassing. That's the other great part I remember. If there's a third option, is just the city how it rallies around, and that's why they're upset. Like that's why last year people get lost in the negativity. That's passion, like that's caring, that they're that upset. So, but yeah, the whiteout, like I said, not being from here, it totally encompasses you, and it's just a great atmosphere.
I was going to ask, you always say that when the Jets are doing well, you don't get any text, but when they're not doing well, it blows up on the text line. So I want to know. I haven't. I guess we haven't talked about this, but has the text line been as dead as we thought it was going to be?
No, like that's something Bob Irving taught me about the Bombers. And so I was doing the CJOB sports show in my first time at CJOB, and he's like if you ever guest, especially doing a show at night, um, guests drop out all the time, or this came up or that came up, and so he's like, if you're ever in trouble, open the phones, talk about the Bombers, get people's thoughts, or the Jets. There was a couple times I couldn't get any calls, and I said to him, I go, man, that's a struggle. Am I teeing them up wrong, or how do I get more people? And he said, oh, people are always listening, Jim. But he said, in all my years experience, when the Bombers are winning, nobody calls. When the Bombers are losing, you can't get to all the calls. And so that's just the passion of this market he was trying to explain to me. So the text line has been there. Like there's not a lot of negativity on it the past 2 weeks. There was after the Vegas game, of course. Like people are shell shocked. They're a little gun shy with this roster, that when they see a Dallas game or when they see a Vegas game, like that Vegas game is, I mean, how many times have you seen that with Connor Hellebuck the past 5 seasons? Doesn't matter whether they're a playoff team or not. When he gets shell shocked like that and the team gets caved in, it's just hard for fans to not see the similarities or see through that and go, that could be the anomaly, because he's been the hero for far too long. But they've been fine. Like there's the odd person asking a question. I mean, today, Braden, we got the people that said, hey, it's only 12 games. So that crowd is coming in. But
Yeah.
they're right. Like it is only 12 games. But that's where we're at. I can't make it 25 games. I can't make it, you just talk about what you see, what you feel. And so the passion is there and the negativity isn't, but it is on the games that they're not well, or like we still get the odd text of same roster. Why do you expect anything different? And so, you have to quantify that. Like my girlfriend's great because she always reminds me, you have to remember, and I'm not saying this egotistically, that, you do this for a living. It's your job to follow every quote, every period. When I watch and listen on 680 I take notes, like it's work. Um, and so she reminds you that, like, you watch and consume it differently than other people. Like sometimes when they're mad, they're just asking a question and stuff. And so it's always great to remind myself of that. So that's how I take the text line. That's how I take, like, and look, we don't agree with a lot of some of the fans out there, and they don't agree with us, but that's the passion, that's the conversation. So, but the text line, to your point or question, has been rather tame lately at 8-3-1.
Yeah, I bet.
You don't want anybody fired.
Well, that's nice. That's a first to hear. That in the off season it was completely the other way. So we'll take
people got to get fired in the off season.
We also, my roommate listens to your show, especially over the summer. He listened to it every day. He was working. And so he wanted me to ask you, with all this whole Twitter thing going on, did you have to pay for your check mark on Twitter?
No, I didn't. I got a funny story about how I got my check mark, and it has nothing to do with me being a reporter. I had to apply for it because I was there. I don't know if you guys know the actress Reese Witherspoon. I only say that because she's my age. I think everybody knows Reese Witherspoon. She's married to a guy named Jim Toth.
Yep.
And Jim Toth is a Hollywood agent, and that's how they met. And so when I was on Twitter, I started getting the odd requests from People Magazine about, and they called my parents' house once. They called the Manitoba Moose once. Their communications director, Scott Brown, when I got to the Moose game, said, I had the most bizarre call with People Magazine today. And I made the joke of like, oh, sexiest man alive, Brown? And he's like, yeah, I wish. They asked me if I can confirm if Jim Toth was at the game last night. And he's like, yeah, he's at all the games. And then they're like, oh, he was. Can you tell me or confirm that if Reese Witherspoon was with them? And he's like, that I cannot do. I know he was in the press box, but who is this? What is this about? And stuff. And so when I went on Twitter, I just after a couple of years or a year or something, I applied. Just so like I got a lot of people requesting charity, like charity, can you do a charity function? Can you do this in the Los Angeles area? And I'm like, what? And so that's how I got my check mark is I applied and they said, is there, and I don't think I got it right away. And then, so they said, is there anything else you can help us verify or a reason why you think you need one? And then I said, well, there's a more famous, much more, I should just say a famous Jim Toth, and I'm not that guy. And they said, oh, the check mark came the next day. So no, I didn't pay for it. It was probably the other Jim Toth going, can you get this guy verified so people stop thinking I'm him?
While I was 1 years old when Legally Blonde came out, I have seen it. I know.
Well, you're ahead of me because I have not. Although the request has been made of me over the years, and I'm just like, not my thing. But I have seen many of her movies. She's fun. I used to have fun with it all the time when people would say, "Hey, I hear you did like people legitimately you married Reese Witherspoon," and I would just say, "Yeah, you should see the way she talks to me. It's awful."
Yeah, I don't know. Well, he wanted me to ask that. He's going to be actually so pumped that I asked that even.
Yeah, well, yeah, you can tell him I didn't pay for it, but
Yeah.
I am at the level that I probably should have to. I'll say that.
Well, now we're going to get into the Bui question of the week. And I wasn't sure what it was going to be this week. I was sort of hemming and hawing about it all week. And then I saw your hat that makes me just furious. And so, how do you feel about the Astros winning the World Series?
I needed this. I feel as if a weight has been lifted from me. So I am a unapologetic Houston Astros fan. I have been my entire life. I have a Jeff Bagwell jersey, Bags, Biggio, back in the day, all those guys, the Canadians that used to play. But it started to wear on me that tainted title of 2017. And you and I have had this discussion. Poor Noah is rolling his eyes and going, cheaters are cheaters. And I understand this. But obviously, being an Astros fan, I read everything about it. There was that great guy who broke down every single uh, can being beat and stuff. I know the players who were involved. I know the players who weren't. I'm happy to say Altuve wasn't, but I'm not happy to say Springer, Bregman, Correa, all those guys took part. But I'll say this: I just needed that title because it bothered me. It weighed on me. Noah doesn't know this in your listeners, but I'm a Bears fan. I'm a Sixers fan. I'm an Astros fan, and I'm a Flames fan, born and raised. So, I don't have a lot of championships. I don't have a lot to gloat about. I've been beaten up so much. So when they won that title, I was so excited, and then to hear the fallout of it. So I am one of the fans that is as I'm not one of the fans that say deal with it, or I'm one of the fans that other teams are doing it. I know other teams were, but other blah blah blah. I was one of the fans that said that doesn't sit well with me. I don't. I look. They have the title. I don't know how I feel about it. I don't like have a bunch of 2017 World Series shirts like I should. I feel I was awful. I struggled with it. So this one means the world to me. I felt relief when they won in 2017. A quick story. I They won, and my girlfriend and it was that's great. Now I'm going to bed. It was a weeknight, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna have a beer and just watch the post game. And all of a sudden, I don't know how it got away, but there was 8 empty cans of beer in front of me. I was just like in my glory. Every post game comment, everything, and I'm just like having a beer, I had a self party. Like I was just the biggest loser. That's how happy I was about that title. And then just my heart ripped up. So the fact that we have a clean title, and I thought Lance McCullers said it best. Like somebody asked him, "Do you atone for 2017?" Or but like, is here's the thing about 2017 is it's great for those players to do it this way. But he said we owed this to the players who came after 2017 and had to deal with all the stuff that the 2017 players caused. And so this is why this title is great for us 2017 players to put the rest that were not good enough to win a title, but more so for the ones that came after to silence the people that, Yankee Stadium, Angel Stadium, and what they go through because they weren't a part of it. So I know I took up way too many time, but I am so happy with this title. I feel like it's life changing. I feel like I can rest easy now, if that makes sense.
Greatest cheaters in sports, not named Woods.
Noah.
Oh, you have to throw him in there, really? Oh, you did it to me. You know what? We're almost out of time. I'm seeing the 1 minute remaining on our Zoom call here. So, Jim, thanks so much. This was amazing. First guest, it went way better than expected. I thought there was gonna be way more hiccups trying to even get somebody on. So this was fantastic. If we want to make sure that I think we're gonna have that Movember thing. Is that up?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
up. Yeah, or
Okay.
680. If you go to Movember.com, the 680 CJOB page is up. Please join the team. Doesn't matter if you just raise $20, like it all go to a team and we'll do it together. And it's a great cause, as you know, that I believe in heavily. So it's up and you look good. You look like you've been drinking out of a dirty jar. You too, Noah. It's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to say it was a privilege to get the chance to talk to you. I've listened to you for many years on the radio, so appreciate it, Jim.
Anytime, guys. I appreciate it. I think you got a great podcast here, and as you can tell, I love to talk. Probably too much, extended you too long, but I'll come back anytime. And good luck with the podcast. And it was an honor having me. Thank you, honestly, being the first guest. That means a lot.
Thanks a lot, and everybody, make sure you check out our TikTok at the Whiteout Pod and our Twitter at the Whiteout Pod as well, and then watch on YouTube. Oh Christ.